At lunchtime on Friday, I was sitting in the cafeteria as usual, talking with my best friend Stan. In fact, we didn't have much in common, and we probably wouldn't have become friends if not for the circumstances. One factor was that we both worked for the same company, but I worked in sales and customer service in the field, and he worked in production. It's unlikely that this would be enough for us to become friends. We also lived diagonally from each other on the same street, and although this fact did not necessarily bring us closer, the combination of these two connections seemed to play a role. In truth, the real reason for our friendship was not Stan, but his charming wife Diana. I only started keeping in touch with Stan after I first met her. Now I spend every Saturday at their house, sitting in front of the TV and discussing football with Stan, while insatiably admiring Diana. I usually sit with the newspaper on my lap, although I rarely read it, but it is very useful for hiding my excitement during the day. Diana is short, with short black curly hair, sparkling brown eyes, and a cheerful personality. She can be described as a pocket Venus, with breasts slightly larger than normal for her slender figure and the most perfect ass I've ever seen. The reason Stan was able to get such a hottie is because he was a professional football player when they met and got married. He was 20 years old and only playing for the second team of the lower division, and it is unlikely that he would have achieved much in his career, but Stan insists that he had potential. It doesn't matter anymore because 5 months after the wedding, he suffered a terrible injury while playing. The injury was so serious that it not only ended his career, but also left him unable to even play for the amateur team. Despite this, Stan still loves football, hence our Saturday nights, and I have an ulterior motive for keeping him company. Diana always wore a thong under very tight trousers made of thin fabric, usually white or pastel, and you have to understand that she was simply a pleasure to look at. In general, she always dressed in a way that emphasized her figure, unlike my wife Olivia, who preferred a more subdued style, except perhaps on Friday nights. On Fridays, Olivia and Diana, along with other young married women, went to nightclubs, while Stan and I consoled ourselves in the local pub. To complete the picture, I will add that Diana worked at home on the computer and Olivia worked in a hosiery company. My wife's job was similar to mine. She also traveled to different sales outlets, but her business trips were not so local, and on average, she spent the night away from home twice a week. Olivia and I had been married for 8 years, while our friends had only been married for 6, but for various reasons we had not yet had children. I admit that I always looked admiringly and intently at any attractive woman I met, but that does not mean that I had little appreciation for my wife. On the contrary, I was still deeply in love with her, even after 8 years of marriage. Olivia is tall for a woman 173 centimeters, and her 8 centimeters heels make her exactly my height. She has a more classic beauty than Diana, with long honey hair and a slender, elegant body. I like to think of her as an exclusive woman, both in a fashion sense and in a personal sense. She has everything feminine in place in sufficient measure, but her main feature is her legs. I once overheard a man say that she had legs right up to her armpits, and although this was an exaggeration, it conveyed the impression she gave. The current fashion for trousers for women did not suit Olivia, but she had the opportunity to show off her legs at work. She was working as a model when we met, and during the first 2 years of our marriage, she was sometimes hired to participate in trade shows where she would demonstrate the products of a hosiery company. The firm then decided to hire her full-time as a receptionist, but with the responsibilities of an internal model. After 2 years, the company's boss decided that Olivia had sales ability and decided to train her. So he began taking her with him 2 days a week when he traveled to other cities. After a year, he turned her into a good sales agent for the company, although I still don't understand why she couldn't be trained on the spot. Olivia took over his travel to remote locations 2 days a week and was given her own local site for the other 3 days. Around the same time she started training, Stan and Diana bought a house across the street, and as I mentioned, I quickly became friends with them. The women also hit it off quickly, and I truly believe they are more true friends than Stan and I were. We started visiting each other on Friday evenings. Within a few months, Stan and I were popping into the local pub for one quick drink before heading back to our wives, and within a couple of weeks, we were spending 2 hours behind the bar each time. This continued until the girls announced that instead of staying at home and being bored while we got drunk in the pub, they would go to a nightclub. I think they went there the first time to prove something to us, but they liked it so much that it soon became part of a Friday ritual. So I was sitting in the dining room with my friend, and more for the sake of conversation than out of real interest, I asked, "What's wrong, Stan? You look pretty gloomy." "Nothing," he replied, adding another spoonful of ketchup to the other side of the plate. "Come on," I insisted. "You've been walking around like a daze for several weeks now. Something is clearly bothering you, so you better tell me." "If you're wondering, I think Diana is cheating on me," he said sadly. I couldn't help but laugh. "I don't believe it for a second." "Where did you get this from?" Stan has always been a bit paranoid, for example. He had a conspiracy theory explaining why he was never promoted, although rumors were that he was simply not very good at his job. This is true. I wish it weren't so, but it is. I have proof. What other evidence? Cigarette butts. Twice I found cigarette butts in the ashtray of a brand that Diana does not smoke. I asked her who was smoking. She seemed a little confused, and then said that a man from the company she works with had stopped by to discuss new projects. This seems quite plausible to me. That doesn't explain why I found a cigarette butt of the same brand in the ashtray next to the bed. But I didn't tell her about it. Stan switched to a confidential tone. If she cheats and thinks that I don't know anything, this will hold her back. But if she finds out that I am aware, then nothing will stop her from continuing. "Surely there will be an innocent explanation for this," I said, although my confidence was shaken. Since then, the ashtrays are always empty when I come home, but this did not deceive me. I checked the kitchen trash can and found butts from 3 different brands of cigarettes, as well as a couple of cigar butts. I also found an empty ashtray in the bedroom, although we never bring them there. "This is all?" I asked, trying to sound dismissive, but my confidence began to fade. "There's still a wet spot on the bed," he continued. "We made love for the first time the day before, and I thought it was because of this. But when it happened again, 3 days had already passed, and I knew for sure that she had already changed the sheets. Wet spot. Anything else?" "Yes," he said triumphantly. "I found a man's watch under the pillow so elegant." The next night, all the furniture in the house had been rearranged, and I realized that they had turned the house upside down trying to find them. I was even glad that they spent time searching and not making love. Diana asked me if I had found anything, but when I asked, for example, she simply said, "Nothing important." "Do you still have your watch?" "No, I pawned them. I think they were quite expensive because I got £100 for them." Stan smiled wryly. "Diana may have had sex, but I got some beer." Despite my feelings for his wife, it all seemed very convincing. "What are you going to do?" I asked, and the tone of my voice showed that I was now taking his accusations seriously. "I don't know," he answered helplessly. "I was hoping that you could give me some advice. I admit that this all looks bad, but perhaps we shouldn't jump to conclusions too hastily." "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Stan said enthusiastically. "I know that you are at home in the mornings and could look after my house. I wish I knew who this son of a bitch is." Despite my doubts, I agreed to help. "Great," Stan responded enthusiastically. "We can divide this into 2 halves. You watch at least part of the day, and I will continue to look for evidence at home in the evenings." That evening in the pub, we discussed his problems some more. I remember having to keep repeating that I would look after his house, but after a few pints I had trouble remembering the whole conversation. The next day I mentioned Stan's suspicions to my wife. "Stupid man, why did he get this into his head?" she said with contempt. "Diana tells me everything, so I would be the first to know if she was capable of something." I didn't mention his evidence. To be honest, I immediately regretted that I had betrayed my friend's trust, because I knew that Olivia would convey this information to Diana at the first opportunity. In addition, it seemed to me that she too quickly dismissed the possibility of betrayal, and the words "cover up" flashed through my head. I spent time at home on Monday morning, and when Olivia left, I called the client to reschedule the meeting for a couple of hours. I decided to spend my free time updating the documentation on my computer. The benefit of this job was that from my office, I could see Stan and Diana's house across the street. The only difficulty was that Stan installed a lattice from the door to the gate, and clematis and climbing roses climbed along it, completely blocking the view. It was almost like an invitation for robbers. Almost nothing could be seen through it. I was lucky that I noticed some movement, and looking closer, I was able to make out a male figure hiding in the shadow of the arch. He looked around and, making sure that there was no one around, quickly went out and walked briskly down the street. I was stunned. It looked like Stan was right. I didn't sleep much that night, wondering what to do, but one thing was clear: I had to act before Olivia had time to talk to Diana. The next day, just as my wife left on another day trip, I crossed the street and knocked on Diana's door. She opened in her usual high-heeled shoes and a short robe, which she held in front of her, holding it with her hands. She looked surprised but not upset by my visit. Without wasting time on greetings, I blurted out, "Stan thinks you're cheating on him and asked me to keep an eye on the house to see if any men are coming here." Diana did not show the slightest emotion. "And," she asked, "yesterday morning I looked out the window and really saw a man coming out of your house." As soon as I said this, Diana opened her robe, and in a moment I saw her breasts, and then, as she shifted her weight from one leg to the other, the robe fell open, exposing half of them. At this point, I was no longer looking at her face, but I would have sworn that she was grinning when she asked, "And what are you going to tell Stan?" I had to swallow hard before answering. "I don't really want to tell him anything." "In that case, maybe we should go upstairs and discuss everything," Diana invited softly. I followed her, not believing my luck, although I think a psychologist could easily prove that I secretly hoped for just such an outcome. Diana, walking up the stairs, slowly dragged her robe behind her like a pheasant's tail. Staggering slightly, she kept swaying her bare buttocks in front of me. Crossing the bedroom, Diana slowly took off her robe and let it fall to the floor. Having reached the bed, she turned to me and lay on her back. Her movements were confident and full of expectation. Determination shone in her eyes, and I felt how it charged the air between us. We got closer, feeling a mutual attraction that was growing every second. She was truly passionate and enthusiastic. Her every breath and movement spoke of how long she had wanted this. When our bodies met, it was more than just physical contact. This was the moment when our desires and feelings merged together. She was full of energy and involvement. Her every gesture was filled with a desire for intimacy, and every moment seemed special. As everything gradually calmed down, I realized that this moment was something special that would leave a mark on my memory for a long time. Lying in post-coital euphoria, the last thing I wanted to think about was her husband, but Diana apparently felt the need to say, "I still love Stan, you know, and I will never leave him. The problem is that he has low libido, and that injured leg of his isn't helping. That's why I need other men, because if I don't have sex every day, I start to feel bad." "Well, now that you have me, you can get rid of the rest," I said confidently. "If you could see me every day, I would gladly leave them. But we both know that this is impossible," Diana answered directly. "I want you to have sex with me every chance you get, but when you can't, I'll still need pleasure." I wasn't very happy about what she said, but it was too early in our relationship for me to start putting conditions, so I had to deal with the inevitable jealousy as best I could. I didn't feel guilty at all, and mostly because I'd been through this before. A few years ago, I had a 4-month affair that ended completely naturally and without consequences, so I saw no reason why it couldn't happen again. Out of curiosity, I asked Diana if she was tormented by her conscience for cheating on Stan. Diana thought for just a moment and then said, "Women don't need to feel guilty because it doesn't affect their husband in any way. But with men, it's not like that. When a man has sex with someone during the day, He usually either has less ability or desire for sex in the evening. But a woman can make love to her lover all day and still happily do the same with her husband at night. For example, one Friday, a few months ago, after I spent a stormy day with my lover, I was also fucked in the car when I met a guy in a club. And then, when I returned home, for some reason Stan was awake and terribly excited. That's how the day turned out. I was shocked by the news that she was having sex with men in a club, and it gave me an unpleasant thought. But before asking the inevitable question, I carefully asked, "How often do you have sex when you go to the club on Fridays?" "Most often, in fact, much more often than I don't," she answered without the slightest hint of shame. "Is Olivia doing the same?" "As far as I know, no. In all the time that I go there with her, I have never seen her leave with a man. I often leave, so I can't be 100% sure, but I don't think she leaves after me," Diana admitted honestly. "But never underestimate women." After we had sex twice more, Diana came out of bed, saying, "I'll bring us something to drink now, but you stay here and save your strength." I lay there enjoying the feeling of contentment. However, as I waited for her to return, I couldn't help but agree with her comment that men are quickly exhausted. I was very glad that Olivia would not come home that night demanding her conjugal rights. When Diana returned, she was holding wine, one glass, cigarettes, and an ashtray, as well as a bedspread. It soon became clear why all this was needed, because very little wine was drunk from the glass. Despite this excitement, I still wasn't ready for another round, so Diana lit a cigarette, complaining that I didn't smoke. She found smoking with her lover a very intimate activity. Her comment reminded me of Stan, so I warned her. "You need to be careful. Stan is becoming very suspicious and is constantly looking for evidence. He mentioned that he once found a wet spot on the bed when you two hadn't made love for 3 days. "Well, he himself gave me an excuse in his own words," Diana answered irritably. "How could he even expect me to go unnoticed for 3 days? Honestly, if everything depended on him, everything would have healed completely." She was silent for a few moments, and then continued more calmly. "For a long time, I carefully checked the house after my lover left so that Stan would not suspect anything, but lately I have become less careful. I got bored and Stan is so clingy that it gets annoying sometimes. Maybe I secretly hoped that he would find out after all in order to somehow enliven our lives. But now I'll be more careful." "Another piece of evidence is the ashtray," I said, pointing to it. "Stan found cigarette butts of other brands. I know Stan already asked me about the cigarettes, but since then I always empty all the ashtrays in the house before he comes home." Here I committed another betrayal towards my friend. "This is not enough. Stan knows you throw cigarette butts in the kitchen trash and checks it every night. He had already compiled a list of 3 brands of cigarettes that should not be in the house. At least I didn't mention the watch." "You sneaky sly," Diana cursed, although a smile flashed across her face, as if she was impressed by her husband's insight. "Stan also talked about 2 cigar butts." This time Diana laughed out loud. "It was Morris. Call me Monica if you want, but I liked what he did to the cigars. Preparing them for smoking, he said it improved the taste. Morris was a real jolly fellow, but I had to ask him not to come again. The smell of smoke lingered in the house for too long, especially in the bedroom, and I was afraid Stan would smell it when he got home. This was just the first of many days when I would sneak across the road to indulge in intense, if slightly naughty, sex. On those days when my wife was away overnight, I could hardly wait until her car was out of sight before rushing to Diana's door. I very quickly appreciated the decorative grille at Diana's gate from the point of view of a secret lover, because it turned out to be priceless. From her hiding place, one could quietly observe the street and choose the perfect moment to exit. It was so convenient that I noticed how well this decorative element fit into her secret life. "This is a godsend for your meetings," I once said to Diana, grinning. She giggled. "There is no accident here. I asked Stan to build it this way. When I first started dating men on the side, we often went to motels because I was afraid that the neighbors might notice if too many men came to my house. But now I don't have to worry. Stan built it exactly how I wanted. The funny thing is that he is so proud of his grill. This is the only thing he got right the first time. It never occurs to him that it was his work that made the safe arrival of all my lovers possible. One day I asked her, "How long were you married to Stan before you started cheating?" "9 months," she answered without thinking for a second. "When he was injured, he was kept in the hospital for almost 4 months. Then he was sent to home treatment, and a physical therapist began to come to us 3 times a week to work on his knee. For a long time, Stan lay in bed for an hour at a time with his leg in some kind of stretch. The physiotherapist, Stu, was charming. Blonde, short-haired, wearing a white t-shirt and tight white pants. He had a small white sleeveless vest that showed off his tanned, muscular arms. Diana smiled, remembering this. The first 2 times he came, I bought coffee for both of them after Stu set up the treatment equipment, and they chatted until the procedure was over. I was a very good wife at the time, but 4 months without sex was driving me crazy, and I thought, what a terrible waste of opportunity. The next time I only brought 1 cup and told Stu that I had something for him in the kitchen. He thought I was talking about coffee. Over the next 3 months, we spent many pleasant hours making love while my husband's leg was stretched. Even when the stretching was no longer necessary, Stan still needed a massage, and although the massage could be done anywhere in the house, Stu insisted that the procedure take place in the bedroom. But he still continued to come down to me for coffee. We had less time, but Stan walked down the stairs very slowly, so we always had enough time for great sex. I think every woman should sleep with a physiotherapist at least once they know so much about the human body. Of course, when Stan found a job and started going to work, I could no longer do without the supplement and began looking for a replacement for Stu. With so many lovers, I don't understand why you would risk going to a club on Fridays. When I dance and kiss a guy, I have a terrible curiosity to find out what he's like in bed, Diana explained. Some of them later become my permanent ones. Those who come to my house are mostly married. I prefer married people because sooner or later they develop a conscience and stop calling, which saves me from having to leave them. I hate it when I have to leave a guy with whom I had a great sexual relationship. In general, a couple of passionate minutes on Friday is not sex in the full sense of the word. It doesn't even compare to spending several hours having comfortable and relaxing sex in this bed. To play it safe, I always make guys wear condoms, but at home I prefer to have sex without them. The conversation ended there because I was immediately inspired by her words, and I decided to give her exactly the feeling that she liked. You may be wondering how Diana and I continued to communicate during our Saturday meetings when she was sitting next to her husband and I was attending their football game. The answer is simple. It was interesting. I sat in my usual place, and Diana spent a lot of time standing behind Stan's chair. From this position, she found great pleasure in teasing me in various ways. She was squeezing her breasts, showing off her cleavage, bending over so she could look at me through her legs. Once she even bared her breasts for a moment. Her goal was to make me somehow show myself on my face, and sometimes she succeeded. At these moments, Stan would turn sharply to see what I was looking at, but all he would find was Diana standing behind him, seemingly intently watching the match. These Saturday afternoons were often painful for me because Diana and I constantly exchanged glances that spoke of how much we wanted each other. Fortunately, on several occasions Diana managed to arrange small moments for us to be alone, even if only for a short time, but at least for physical contact. One day she told me, "We bought a new chest of drawers for the bedroom last Sunday. Would you like to go and look at it?" Pretending to be very interested, I followed her, although over the past few days I had had plenty of opportunities to study this chest of drawers, but I did not glance at it. Another time, I casually mentioned that I had broken the handle of my shovel while doing gardening work. This innocent remark became a reason for Diana to jump up from her seat and offer, "We seem to have a spare shovel in the shed. Do you want to go see it?" This little escape almost turned awkward for us because her pants got dirty in the barn as she knelt down on the dirt floor. Diana liked to be brazen and see how far she could go in front of her husband, although it wasn't particularly difficult because Stan seemed completely inattentive. I suspected that if Manchester United were playing on TV, we could have sex right on the carpet at his feet, and he wouldn't notice. However, there was one incident that really tested the limits of what was possible, and even now I can't help but smile when I remember it. Surprisingly, Diana wore a short skirt that day instead of her usual trousers. Standing behind Stan's chair, she lifted the front edge of her skirt to reveal that she was not wearing panties. Since then, she continued to repeat this action. I was just boiling with desire, and I had a hard time hiding it on my face, so when Diana went into the kitchen to prepare snacks, I almost breathed a sigh of relief. After a while, she called, "Let's go, everything is ready." I walked into the kitchen and saw that there were already 2 trays of snacks on the table. Before I could move towards them, Diana rushed towards me, unbuttoning my trousers and whispering, "I want you to have sex with me, at least for a minute." Having said this, she turned around, lifted her skirt, and bent forward, spreading her legs and resting her hands on the stool. I got back just in time because Stan was just starting to get out of his chair. "You'll be angry with yourself," he said with a pleased intonation in his voice. "Beckham just scored a goal, such a tricky shot, right past the goalkeeper, and you missed it. And he's playing away, so that counts as 2. I ran back to the kitchen, barely holding back my laughter. Diana was still standing in the same position in which I left her. Incredibly, I got horny again. To avoid further temptation, I grabbed the second tray and hurried back to the room. They claim it was offside, but the goal was counted, and that's all that matters at the end of the day, my friend told me. "Whatever you say, Stan," I replied, sitting down next to him. One day in the cafeteria, having decided to make fun of Stan, I said, "Yesterday morning, I saw a man entering your gate, so I started keeping an eye on him." Stan stopped eating and stared at me, but I waited until he asked, "And what?" Then I issued. A few seconds later, he came out, and I realized it was just the postman. I laughed, but it took Stan a moment to realize I was kidding him. To his credit, he also saw it as a joke. However, his sense of humor was less noticeable when I tried to repeat a similar joke a couple of weeks later. This time I said, "I saw a suspicious guy on the street a couple of days ago. He somehow walked stealthily, looked around, and then stopped at your gate." "The postman again?" Stan asked, not taking the bait. I continued with a serious look. "No, I've never seen him before. He's a huge guy, and from his gait you can see that he has, well, let's say, good weight." Stan's reaction was amazing. He seemed to shrink in his seat, and when he asked, "What happened then?" "Nothing," I answered calmly. "He went further to the 43rd house. The guy came out from there, and they left together." Stan looked at me reproachfully. "If you knew how much this torments me, you wouldn't find it funny." The irony was that the very next day, I almost got caught. The next day, I almost got into trouble. As I walked into Stan's house to watch the football game as usual, Diana pulled something out from under a stack of papers and, waving it in the air, said, "Look what you left last time you were here." Stan found this behind the couch while vacuuming this morning. It turned out to be my work ID. I did lose it the last time I visited them, but that visit was on a Thursday morning, and during that time Diana and I had sex on the couch. Looking at Stan, I noticed that he was looking at me suspiciously, and I realized that Diana had intercepted his plan to interrogate me. I was momentarily taken aback by her boldness, but quickly realized that she was trying to tell me the right answer without giving herself away. Catching her thought, I said, "Thank God I was found. I've been looking for him all week. If he hadn't been found, I would have applied for a new one on Monday." The critical moment passed. Stan relaxed and smiled. I escaped trouble again. It would seem who wouldn't envy me. I had a wonderful, loving wife and perhaps the sexiest lover you could imagine. But my luck has gone to my head. Diana and I began to make fun of Stan rather subtly, sometimes even cruelly, but it was not done out of malice. We just enjoyed the fact that the world seemed to belong to us. I saw no reason why it could end But one terrible Saturday was the beginning of the end. I went to the store to get a newspaper, leaving Olivia at home to catch up on sleep after her night out. When I went outside, I noticed Diana frantically waving at me from her gate. Succumbing to some strange premonition, I approached her, looking around in search of Stan. "Olivia knows about us," she hissed as I approached. My heart sank, and I said with my lips, "How?" As I got closer, I noticed that the right side of Diana's face was red and swollen. "I'm afraid I let it slip last night," she said with a feeling of guilt. "But why? How did this happen?" I asked, frantically looking back at the door, afraid that Stan might come out at any minute. "It's okay," Diana assured me. "He's in the supermarket now." Olivia and I were having fun, and she started telling a joke about a guy with some kind of growth on his private part. I was already laughing, and without thinking I said, "You mean like Ken's?" Olivia immediately stopped talking, stared at me, and asked, "How the hell do you know about Ken's wart?" I was confused and almost fell through the ground. Olivia freaked out. "Did you sleep with my husband, you bastard?" I couldn't admit it at that moment, but I didn't deny it either. Instead, I said, "You have no right to call me that, and in general, you yourself are far from a saint." Then she hit me. Right in the eye. I didn't even expect it. I fell, and she stood over me and said, "I'll teach this bastard some sense too." After that, she left. "Damn it," I groaned, feeling the ground disappear from under my feet. "Looks like we'll have to pack our things right now." Diana hesitated and then said, "Listen, if she puts too much pressure on you, ask her how she spends her time when you're not around." "What do you mean? What do you know?" I asked, grabbing her hand. Diana took a step back, freeing her hand. "I won't say anything more," she answered decisively. "It's Olivia's business. If she wants, she'll tell you herself. I just thought you should be prepared. She can be a real bitch when she wants to be." Despite my attempts to extort more, Diana remained steadfast in her decision that this was my wife's business. As I was leaving, I suddenly stopped and asked, "Why do you always call her O?" Diana grinned. "That's what she calls herself when we go to the club. It's a reference to the story of O, if that tells you anything." Her cryptic answer didn't clear anything up for me. Back home, I waited anxiously for Olivia to wake up. But one thought calmed me. Now I had something with which I could respond, although I did not know what exactly. When Olivia finally woke up, it was already the middle of the day. This gave me enough time to remember that she returned home around 5 in the morning. I heard the shower running as she quietly climbed into bed with me 3 hours later than usual after her bachelorette party. I sat in suspense, waiting for her to appear in the kitchen, but when she finally came down, she simply looked into the room and said quite calmly, "I'm going to make myself some coffee. Want?" There was not the slightest hint of scandal. Olivia even brought me a cup of coffee and, putting it on the table, casually said, "I was a little late last night. Sorry." I spent the entire day tiptoeing around the edges of the conversation, expecting the worst, but nothing happened. That night, when we got into bed, Olivia made it clear that we wouldn't have sex, but she didn't push me away like she usually did when she was angry. The next morning, Sunday, we finally made love, and not just like that, it was a rather passionate meeting. This confused me even more. I could understand if Olivia decided to ignore my infidelity with Diana, but it was completely out of character for her to show tenderness and passion. By evening, I was no longer so relieved that I had escaped the doomsday as tormented by burning curiosity. What exactly did Olivia know? And more importantly, what was she leading to by leaving everything as it was? On Monday, Olivia worked from home, and I traveled to run errands. This evening passed quietly, but I noticed that my wife looked at me intently from time to time, as if she was thinking about something. There was no sex that evening, but it didn't seem unusual. The next day, she left on a business trip for 2 days, and I, despite all my internal anxiety, decided not to postpone my visit to Diana. Crossing the road, I knocked on her door. Diana looked a little surprised to see me so soon, but still put on a smile. "So you're still alive, right?" she asked with a grin. "I don't understand anything," I admitted. Olivia didn't say a word. She acts as if nothing happened. Well, that's good, isn't it? Diana said, clearly not understanding my concern. Yes, of course, but it bothers me why she does this. With these words, I took a step forward to enter the house, but Diana suddenly hesitated. Are you sure this is reasonable? She asked with a hint of concern in her voice. Olivia has been on the road for a long time. In any case, I didn't come to do what we usually do, but to find out something, I hastened to reassure her. Then you came in vain, she answered firmly. I said that I won't say anything unnecessary. If you want to know what's going on, ask Olivia. If she didn't tell you anything, it's just your luck. Okay, I said, deciding not to insist, but I would like to know something else. What time exactly did your fight at the club take place, and how much later did Olivia leave? It was quite early, about 12:30. Olivia left 5 minutes after that. Why do you need to know this? She didn't get home until 5 in the morning, I said gloomily, realizing that I was trying to connect the events. Diana looked at me for a while, clearly thinking about something of her own, before she sighed heavily and said, I've done a lot in my life for fun, and I'm not proud of all of my actions, but what I'll tell you is too much. Okay, listen. Olivia left with 3 Pakistanis, or if you prefer, 3 South Asian gentlemen. They looked respectable and rich, but as soon as the car started moving, they immediately began to paw at it. It was clear what was on their minds. This news hit me harder than I could have imagined. I stood there, stunned, unable to say a word. If it weren't for Diana, who took my hand and asked, Are you going to have sex with me? Or are you going to stand here all day feeling sorry for yourself? I, of course, returned to her the next day, but I thought more and more about what was happening to Olivia. Diana tried to console me, repeating that my wife would most likely forget everything, that it was not the end of the world, and that I should not worry. However, the third day of visiting Diana was impossible. I did not know whether Olivia would arrive home early, and in any case, I had things to do at work. When I returned home that evening, Olivia was already preparing dinner. On the surface, everything was business as usual, but underneath the surface, I felt an underlying tension. I knew I had to get her to talk, but I didn't know how. However, after dinner, I made up my mind. As Olivia cleared the table, I said quietly, We need to talk. She nodded without saying a word and headed into the living room. I followed her, feeling nervousness tightening my chest. Suddenly, she looked at me over her shoulder and said with a slight smile, By the way, how is Diana? She still has a red eye, and in general, she's all beaten up, I answered honestly. Olivia laughed briefly. I bet she's mad at me. I shouldn't have hit her, of course, but at that moment I was furious. I don't care what she does in life, but sleeping with your best friend's husband is below the belt. I would never stoop to crawling into Stan's bed. She slowly walked to the bar, took out a glass and poured herself some wine, sat down in a chair, clearly waiting for the conversation to continue. She didn't offer me a drink that was already saying a lot. I sat down opposite and sighed. I take it that you know about Diana and me? Olivia nodded. I guessed it a long time ago. Well, yesterday everything fell into place when she let slip about your peculiarity. However, as I said, I don't really care. If she wants you, good luck. What about you? I asked with caution in my voice. I heard that you left with 3 men last week. She sighed, smiling slightly as if she was a little amused. Yes, it was my mistake. I did it out of revenge, and revenge never leads to anything good. Originally, I was going to go with them, and the next day I would tell you in detail what I did. But when I returned home, I realized that I had gone too far. To be honest, I felt disgusted. She was silent for a moment, as if pondering what she had said, and then continued. You see, Diana has been eyeing you for a long time, I saw it. So what she did is almost forgivable. But I never had any feelings for Stan, and this is the difference between us and her. But then why did you come back so late? I insisted. Do you really want to know? Olivia looked at me with a serious face. Yes, I want to, I answered. although my heart skipped a beat with anticipation. She shrugged her shoulders and continued calmly. Those guys turned out to be big fans of the sex book. And I'm not exaggerating, they knew every position. Straight sex was still tolerable, but... She paused before adding, there were a lot of things I didn't like. For example, their food, all this spicy food. They had a strong body odor, which became even more suffocating when they sweated. And they sweated a lot. They didn't give me a minute's respite. They took turns working with me without stopping. And there was a lot more that I don't even want to tell you. Use your imagination. What are you talking about? I asked, feeling more and more depressed. Come on, Ken, Olivia answered with annoyance. These are people of a different culture. Think about it. I was crushed. Horrible pictures flashed through my head one after another, and I didn't know what to say. I was horrified not so much by the fact that she cheated, but by the fact that it all really happened and how calmly she told it. What do you do on other Fridays? I asked rather than change the subject. Nothing special, she said, raising her glass to her lips. I behaved much more modest than your dirty little mistress. In the 3 years that Diana and I went to the club, I only allowed myself to go to the end with someone twice. This is usually limited to kissing and a little groping. Yes, I did pleasure myself a few times, but to be honest, most men are content with that. What happened last Friday is an exception. I sat there, stunned by her words. It turns out that she was with other men throughout this time. But from the expression on her face, I realized that she had not yet told me everything. This is all? I asked, not believing that this was the end of the story. Olivia sighed and looked away then, as if plucking up courage, she answered. No, not everything. But you don't want to know more, Ken. It's enough that we both betrayed each other. Anything I say will only make things worse. Worse than what I already heard? I asked bitterly. I don't know, she shook her head. It was clear that it was not easy for her to talk about this. Okay, she said, falling silent for a moment. I was traveling for work for 4 years. And during this time, I only slept alone a couple of times. I did the math quickly. 4 years, 2 days a week is too much. It felt like I had been hit in the solar plexus. Why? I barely managed to say. You have to understand, Ken. Think about what happened 4 years ago, she said, looking at me reproachfully. 4 years ago? What happened then? Claire Stewart, Olivia answered quietly. Claire was the name of my former lover. I didn't know you knew, I said. You kept going out into the garden to talk on your cell phone, Olivia explained. It was obvious that something was going on, so one morning I got up early and had time to read your messages. You should be jailed for such things. I was furious and almost left immediately, but then I thought, don't be angry, take revenge. As it turns out, my boss Craig has been trying to get me into bed for a long time, so you made it easier for me. We slept in motels a couple of times, and then he started taking me on business trips, but that was just so we could have sex. He told people he was training me, but the only training I had was on my back. It's a little unfair, though, because I actually learned a lot from the job. Soon he was doing half the calls, and I was handling the rest, which gave us more time to have sex. You've been cheating on me for 4 years now, I interrupted. No. A year later, Craig's wife began to suspect something and pinned him down, forcing him to return home every evening. He still sometimes bangs me in his office, but essentially that's all over. So I started walking alone at night, and I really didn't like it, because it was terribly boring to be alone. But then I realized that every hotel in the world is full of single men, and I haven't looked back since. Simple calculations showed that during this time she could have had about 300 other men. If I think about it too much, I will go crazy. It dawned on me that if I hadn't loved her so much, the pain would have been less, and with that thought came the realization that despite everything Olivia had told me, I didn't want to lose her. For a moment, I made a bold decision and said, don't tell me anything more. I forgive you everything if you can forgive me for Diana. Then we can forget about everything and live for each other. Be faithful from now on. A sad smile appeared on my wife's face as she said, sorry, honey, but I like my life too much the way it is to think about giving it up. You have nothing to be ashamed of in this matter, Ken, but the truth is that I'm much more addicted to sex. It all started with Craig because he's really huge. Now I'm very picky about who I sleep with. If a guy approaches me in a hotel bar, I ask him directly, "What do you have to offer?" They immediately think that I am a girl of easy virtue. They begin to get confused and mumble that they did not understand. Then I laugh and say that I mean inches, not money. It's strange, but if they don't meet my expectations, most people are quite philosophical about rejection. Olivia told it like it was funny, but I had a hard time laughing. "Don't be sad," she said. "You might find it comforting to know that I haven't been getting picked on so often lately. You see, I have about a dozen regular clients, and they all have what I need between their legs. A nice bonus is that I go to them most often, so I save money on hotels. It's an ideal situation, so you can see why I don't want to give it up." "What are you offering me?" I asked anxiously, afraid that I already knew the answer. "It's simple. We continue the same as we did last week, last month. You continue to have sex with Diana, and I continue to enjoy my men. The only thing that has changed is that now I know about your little sin, and you know about mine. I still love you, and I still enjoy having sex with you, but as long as I get my weekly dose of flesh on the road, I really don't care who you sleep with." My wife very clearly decided everything for herself, and I had very little choice. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, and only the thought that I could still find my way to Diana's warm thighs kept me from thinking about suicide. The next day at lunch in the cafeteria, as usual, I walked up to the table where Stan was already sitting, but as soon as I got close, he tried to rush at me, shouting, "You fucking bastard, you were the one who had sex with Dee all the time." Luckily for me, his bad leg gave out on him, and he fell, hitting his elbows hard on the table. "I don't know what you're talking about. Where did you get that idea, idiot?" I shouted back, and my righteous anger stopped him. "I just found out about the fight," he said more calmly. "Dee doesn't say why she was there, but I can guess. The only possible reason Olivia could have hit her is because she found out that you and Dee were together." Judging by my feelings, I could have simply turned around and walked away, but I decided it was worth trying to appease my friend. "You're a fool," I said with feigned warmth. "You were so focused on mysterious men coming to your house during the day that you never thought about Friday nights. If you want to know, I had a wild row with Olivia last night because she almost admitted that she sometimes has fun with men in a nightclub. If she's into it, I bet Dee is too. I couldn't find out what the fight was about, but apparently they both wanted the same guy. It wasn't the most honorable attempt, but it seemed to work, drawing semi-recognition. All I had to do now was contact Dee this afternoon and tell her to deny everything and blame it on Olivia. If I can smooth over this moment, there is a chance that our romance will continue." We chatted a little more until I felt him relax, and then I asked, "So, let's go for a beer tonight." "I'm quitting beer for a while. I need to keep my head clear," he replied. "In any case, I'm not going to let Dee into this club anymore." I got up. "What about football tomorrow?" Stan looked up at me with anger in his eyes. "I don't want you anywhere near my wife. You've gotten away with it now, Ken, but I'm starting to remember a lot of little things that didn't make sense back then." Excluded from my lover's life, and knowing that my beautiful wife was going to continue dating a long line of major lovers, I felt a bitter pain in my stomach. It was going to get worse in the future, much worse. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.